Thank you for that introduction, Herman, and thank you again for all of you last night for all of the ideas and suggestions and energy and memories and reflections. That was really wonderful to see last night, and I think a great way to start off with everything that we're going to talk about today. So now that we've had a chance to talk about recipes or that recipe and culinary heritage, let's go back to Riza's recipe. More importantly, let me show you what the dish looks like. Hearty and yummy. So Riza's recipe is not as thick and stew-like as an Austrian version or a Southern German recipe, but it is thicker than a Hungarian variant, which is more like a beef broth with dumplings and potatoes. So again, hearty, yummy. Really suggest you all give it a try. Now that we've discussed the recipe a little bit last night and you had a chance to read about it, and I really hope I've whetted your appetite, and if not, pictures to enjoy, let me tell you a little bit about my research and where Riza Pisco and her recipes fit in. My research project focuses on two Jewish families. First, we have the Cordy family from Cologne. Walter Cordy, his wife Helene, and their son Claude emigrated from Cologne at the end of 1938. And they settled in early 1939 in Brookline, Massachusetts, which is a small town next to Boston. And I see a few people in the audience know where I'm talking about. Great. The second family is the Pisco family. Ernest Pisco, his wife Riza, and their daughter Susanna left Vienna in mid-1938, although they did not arrive in the United States until early 1940. The Pisco family also settled near Brookline. The two children, so Claude Cordy and Susanna Pisco, they eventually met shortly thereafter. They got married in 1948. They had two sons, each of whom also has two sons. In the early 1990s, Claude and Sue each wrote an autobiography to give their sons and grandsons information about their family heritage in Europe. And their sons provided me with copies of these autobiographies along with other family documents. So this family documentation, along with archival documents from across Europe and the United States, that's the foundation of my research. Now, by using all of these documents, family and archival documents, to tell the stories of the Cordy and Pisco families, we can see how their lives intersected with events that had national, continental, and global repercussions. For example, we can learn about the experience of middle-class Jews in Nazi Germany, as well as in Austria before and after its annexation by Germany in 1938. We can also learn about the experience of immigrating to the United States in the interwar period, the experience of being enemy aliens in the United States during World War II, and the experience of becoming American citizens. Finally, we can also see how their Central European heritage had a significant impact on their lives as Americans. And it's this last theme, again, this continuing influence of their lives and experiences as their Central European heritage. This is where the topic of today's presentation comes from, the topic of Riza's recipes. So let's talk more about Riza. Riza Fried was born in 1902 in Komárom, which is a town on the Danube River, so very fitting where we are today, but much further down the Danube River in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in Hungary. From a young age, Riza frequently found herself wandering into the kitchen. She not only watched the servants prepare the family meals, but she quickly began to contribute to the baking and the cooking. As Riza mentioned in a letter that she wrote decades later, one of her earliest recipes was a jelly roll. Perhaps she found this recipe in her mother's handwritten cookbook, or perhaps she learned it from one of the young Hungarian women who worked for her family. As she fondly remembered in her letter written decades later, these women gave her the most basic and yet also the most complicated cooking instructions. Quote, just take as much as needed and cook till it is ready, end quote. Riza's knowledge of the kitchen proved vital many times in her life, likely starting during the First World War when helping her mother and the servants provide meals to Hungarian officers who were billeted in the family's home. Her skills were equally useful less than a decade later in the home of her in-laws. She met her husband, Ernest, through one of her brothers. Riza and Ernest were married in a civil ceremony in Vienna in August 1922, and soon thereafter they moved into the Pisco family home in Vienna. As with her circumstances growing up, Riza continued to live a comfortable middle-class life as a wife and then as a mother, as her daughter Susanna was born in April 1925. She also expanded her cooking repertoire at this time by learning Czech recipes from her husband's aunts. The Pisco family's fairly idyllic life was shattered with the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany in March 1938. Shortly thereafter, Riza's husband Ernest was arrested because of his work as a newspaper editor. He was also, according to Germany's racially based citizenship laws, a Jew, although his Jewish heritage really did not play a role in why he was arrested. Ernest remained in prison in Vienna for just over 2 months. A condition of his release from prison was that he agreed to leave the country, that is Germany, because Austria was now a part of the Third Reich. The Pisco family left Vienna in July 1938, and after brief and quite eventful stays in Czechoslovakia and Hungary, they immigrated to England in December 1938. Ernest and Riza were able to get visas to go to England to work as domestic servants. So him as a butler and her as a cook. But here's the thing, English was not a language that any member of the Pisco family knew. However, began to learn this new language quite creatively. In her employer's home, she found a copy of a well-known English cookbook called Mrs. Beeton's. Okay, from Chuckles, I guess some people have heard of that. These recipes served as an introduction to both English food and the English language for Riza. However, when Riza was at a loss for new words in this new language, she found that a little bit of creativity went a long way. For example, as she later recalled in a letter, quote, "Sign language helped with the butcher. When I wanted a shoulder, I patted my shoulder. When I wanted a leg of lamb or veal, here was another part of my body." The butcher, of course, got a great kick out of this, end quote. Riza was just beginning to master English recipes like meat pies and fruit fools when the paperwork came through that allowed her husband, and their daughter to immigrate to the United States in March 1940. Once settled in Massachusetts, Riza again found employment as a cook, and she supported her husband as he returned to his career in journalism. But oh, the confusion, as Riza quickly learned the differences between English and American baking. English biscuits became American cookies, and English scones are more akin to American biscuits. But for the next couple of years, Riza did work for a couple of families as a living cook, both of whom were thrilled when she made recipes that reflected her Central European heritage. A couple of years later, she retired from the culinary work, and she found employment as a bookstore clerk. And she subsequently took on other roles in the book publishing business for the next 4 decades. With publishing as her profession, cooking became a hobby. Riza was always thrilled to discover new recipes, especially when she and her husband visited Europe in the 1950s and the early 1960s. She not only gathered new recipes, but she shared them with the public. As we've seen from our example, Riza had an infrequent but recurring recipe column in the Christian Science Monitor, which is a daily international newspaper based in Boston. Now, the Monitor as a venue of publication was not a random choice. Ries's husband worked for the Monitor as a journalist from 1940 until his retirement in 1965. Ries's first set of recipes was published in the Monitor in February 1966. The caption under her photo identified Riese for Monitor readers and established her Austrian credentials. Quote, Mrs. Riese Pisco, formerly of Vienna and now a resident of Boston, pounds a slice of veal for her Wiener Schnitzel, a recipe which she gives along with other Viennese favorites to Monitor readers, end quote. In describing Wiener Schnitzel, Riese was a bit sassy. She wrote, quote, what is served in the United States as breaded veal cutlet, usually with tomato sauce, is not, I repeat, not a Wiener Schnitzel. To a Viennese, the mere thought of serving a schnitzel with tomato sauce, or as the custom in northern Germany, pouring gravy over it, must appear as culinary high treason, end quote. Riese then provided the details for what makes a perfect golden brown slice of Wiener Schnitzel. She also provided 4 other recipes to round out a perfect Viennese dinner. And one of those recipes is for a double-layer chocolate cake, sandwiched on top with fresh whipped cream. Oops. I don't know why the picture of the cake is not showing up, but it should be there. Imagine a cake. Because it's scrumptious. I've made it 4 times. It really is a good recipe. Hopefully the later picture will show up here. Riese's recipes immediately resonated with contemporary subscribers to the Christian Science Monitor. On the very day that the first article was written, a reader from Connecticut wrote to Riese. Dear Mrs. Pisco, I've read with delight your article in the Christian Science Monitor on Viennese cooking and have cut out your recipes, ready to try out this weekend. By any chance, would you happen to be the author of any Viennese cookbook? If not, could you recommend any particular one that has interesting Viennese recipes? I spent some time in Vienna 2 years ago, and I was indeed impressed with the thoroughly delicious meals, much of the Wiener Schnitzel you write about in the Monitor, with many thanks for your article and recipes, end quote. Now, as we can see in the margin up here, top left there, Riese did reply to this letter. I unfortunately don't have the reply, so I don't know what, if any, Viennese cookbook she might have recommended. But of course, we do know she continued to publish recipes in the Christian Science Monitor from her first menu in February 1966 through her last recipes in June 1981. Riese provided Monitor readers with almost 150 recipes that reflected her Central European heritage. These recipes included well-known cuisines such as Wiener Schnitzel, Apfelstrudel, Hungarian goulash. So you've seen that recipe. These recipes also included unfamiliar dishes like saddle of venison, bishop's bread, and gourmet's pork. And these recipes included family favorites like Aunt Tersey's cake, wasps' nests, and the good cherry cake. Sprinkled in with these recipes were baking tips, including one we saw last night in the goulash recipe, Riese's repeated insistence that only Hungarian paprika should ever be used. In contrast to showing off her Austrian and Hungarian heritage, Riese's Jewish heritage is noticeably absent. Not one article accompanying any recipe hints at her Jewish background, and her periodic inclusions of bacon and bacon fat, so again we saw that last night with the goulash, as well as recipes for Christmas cookies suggested otherwise. Overall, Riese's recipes were never front page news, but they were a recurring feature in the Christian Science Monitor. Through these recipes and the accompanying stories, Riese shared traditional Central European recipes with Monitor readers. And these readers clearly enjoyed her recipes. As one reader from Oregon wrote to Riese, when my Monitor arrived today, I started in to glance through it and I gave a shout, "Wee! Here's another recipe by Riese Pisco." My husband answered, "Good, When are you going to try it? I thought you would like to know what we think of your recipes. We think they are wonderful. End quote. So my fellow historians in the room can attest the fact that for historians, we mostly work alone. And we rarely have the opportunity to collaborate. But in studying the Piscos, and in particular with Riza, I've had the opportunity to collaborate with some people at the Christian Science Monitor, including a current staff writer, Kendra Norden-Beato. And one of the really important things that I've learned from Kendra that she pointed out, that with Riza publishing these recipes, she contributed to a Boston tradition of women cooking, teaching, and publishing. And this tradition dates back to the 19th century, the late 19th century in Boston, with the Boston Cooking School and its most famous culinary expert, Fanny Farmer. Farmer's cookbooks were pioneering because she wrote recipes with itemized ingredient lists. And she gave specific measurements for ingredients using standardized measuring cups and spoons. So these instructions made cooking American cuisine much more accessible. Also, Farmer's recipes were easily replicable. That accessibility, that replicability provided women with a greater opportunity for greater culinary creativity in their home kitchens. Similarly, Riza made Central European recipes accessible to Monitor readers decades later. Her ingredient lists are clear, as are her instructions. However, clear instructions do not always mean instructions that are detailed enough to ensure a successful recipe. For example, the directions to make the chocolate topping for a soccer torta cake. They seem straightforward, but I can attest through personal failure how to achieve the perfect softball consistency of a sugar and water syrup is not easy. I've not succeeded yet. If you ever have, please let me know. In addition to contributing to Boston culinary tradition, there was also, as I have learned while working with Kendra, a contemporary context for Riza's published recipes. In 1961, in nearby Cambridge, Massachusetts, Julia Child co-authored Mastering the Art of French Cooking. 2 years later, the newspaper The Boston Globe launched a column by Child called The French Chef. And Child appeared on the Boston PBS television station as the French chef for 10 years. So Kendra and I believe that the food editor at the Christian Science Monitor, she was inspired by Child's success and decided to create a Central European counterpart in the Monitor with Riza's recipes. By sharing her recipes, Riza added Austrian, Czech, and Hungarian cuisine to Julia Child's French fare. The key difference, of course, was that Julia Child was born in California and learned French cooking when her husband was posted in Paris. In contrast, of course, Riza was a Hungarian-born immigrant who shared her culinary roots decades after becoming an American citizen. Thus, she also contributed to a tradition of immigrants contributing to cooking culture, not just in New England, but in the country. So recipes, they were clearly a central feature of Riza's life, from a child cooking at home in Hungary to a wife and mother helping her family survive their forced immigration from Vienna, to an author who shared modernized versions of Central European recipes with American readers. Many recipes did not begin with Riza, but with family, with friends, and employees and her child at home. And also, just as these recipes did not begin with Riza, they did not end with her death in January 1995 at age 92. One of the people who cherishes the lessons and legacies of these recipes is Riza's grandson, Eric. He has many fond memories of the many meals made by his grandmother, most especially her chicken paprikash and her apple pie. Eric also has many fond memories of learning baking and cooking skills from his grandmother. So by passing down the recipes, the life cycle of Riza's recipes continues through her grandson. It also continues through me. I mentioned earlier that I've made Riza's chocolate cake. Let's see, does it come up? What? No! How is this possible? I truly tell you, it's scrumptious looking. In addition, Eric and I are collaborating on a cookbook, which we're calling Riza's Recipes, Continental Cooking Before the Second World War. Just as Riza once shared traditional recipes, along with recipes modified for then American readers, Eric and I are now seeking to do the same with this cookbook. We plan to pass along her recipes and some tips, as well as share some tips of our own. So by the way, here are some of my tips if you want to make the Hungarian goulash recipe. These are things I've learned along the way when making that recipe. So if you do make the recipe, please send me the pictures and share your cooking stories. And with that, let's turn to questions, comments, and suggestions. Thank you.